This is Commercial Transformation, the podcast exploring how modern businesses redesign their commercial systems to scale, adapt, and perform. From strategy to execution, structure to flow, we break down what actually drives sustainable growth. Produced by B10.
Most businesses don't fail because they ran out of money. They fail because the commercial system that got them here stopped working long before the money ran out. And here's the harder truth. Nobody saw it coming. Not because they weren't smart, not because they weren't working hard, but because the system looked fine on the surface. The website was live, the CRM had data in it, the sales team was busy, marketing was running campaigns. Everything looked like it was working, until revenue plateaued, until win rates started slipping, until your best salesperson couldn't explain why deals were taking twice as long to close as they did, say, 18 months ago. That's not a motivation problem. That's not a hiring problem either. That's not even a marketing problem. Typically, what you'd find is it's a structural problem. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to give you some context for why this conversation matters right now. Not in a general sense, but in a specific commercial environment we're operating in. You see, buyer behavior has fundamentally changed. The average B2B buyer now completes somewhere between 60 and 70% of their purchase journey before they speak to a human being. That's not a trend. That is the baseline. At the same time, the average sales cycle has lengthened. Budgets are being scrutinized more carefully, and the tolerance for a fractured buying experience where what your website promises doesn't match what your sales team delivers, doesn't match what your onboarding team provides. That tolerance, it is essentially gone. Buyers are more informed, more cautious, and less forgiving of commercial systems that feel disconnected. And most commercial systems are deeply disconnected, unfortunately. Now, you might be thinking, I've heard this before, digital transformation, buyer journey, blah, blah, blah. We know. Yeah, fair enough. But knowing the buyer has changed and actually restructuring your commercial system to meet that buyer, those are two different things. Most organizations are stuck somewhere between the two. They've updated their thinking, but they haven't updated their infrastructure. That gap is where the revenue quietly bleeds out. Let me name the biggest misconception that I see, and I see consistently across sectors, across revenue bands, whether I'm talking to a founder running a 20-person business or a commercial director inside a mid-market company doing 50 million. The misconception is this, that commercial underperformance is a tool problem. It could be, we need a better CRM, we need a new website, we need to invest in marketing automation, we need better reporting, etc., etc. And sometimes, one of those things is genuinely the constraint. But more often than not, those tools aren't the problem. The tools are just exposing the problem. Because what lies underneath is a structural issue, a connectivity issue, a fundamental misalignment between the different parts of the commercial system. I want you to think about your own organization for a moment. How many separate platforms are involved in the journey from someone becoming first aware of your business to them becoming a paying customer, and then a recurring one? For most organizations, that number is somewhere between 7 and 12, and sometimes it can be more. Website, CRM, email platform, proposal tool, e-signature, finance system, onboarding platform, support desk, report dashboard. Now, does data flow cleanly between all of those systems? Is there a single source of truth for customer behavior, pipeline status, and revenue performance? For most organizations, and I want you to answer this truthfully, for most organizations, the answer is no. And when we don't have that connectivity, you don't have a commercial system. You have a collection of commercial tools, which is fundamentally a different thing. Tools without architecture don't generate revenue. They generate activity. And activity is not the same as performance. So let's go deeper, because I don't want to just name the problem. I want to explain how it happens, how a business that's performing well at 10 million in revenue finds itself structurally broken at 30. It starts with what I call layered commercial debt. When businesses are early stage, they make pragmatic decisions. You pick the CRM that's affordable. You use a website template that gets you live quickly. You hire a salesperson who works the way they've always worked. You build a proposal process around what your first few customers needed. And it works because it's the early stages. The complexity is low enough that you can manage the gaps manually. Spreadsheets here, a WhatsApp message there, founder who knows everything because they're involved in everything. But then you grow, and those pragmatic decisions calcify into infrastructure. The affordable CRM becomes the CRM you've invested 3 years ago of data into. The website templates become the website your brand is built around. The sales process becomes institutionalized, even if nobody could actually write it down. And the gaps that you used to manage manually, they get wider because there are more customers, there are more team members, more complexity, and you can no longer bridge those gaps by hand. This is what I mean by structural breakdown. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself, hey, look, I'm over here. It's a slow compounding erosion of commercial performance. And it shows up in a very specific, identifiable way or ways. Your marketing team is generating leads that your sales team doesn't follow up on because they don't think the quality is good enough. We've all been there before. Your sales team is closing deals, but the terms they're agreeing to are creating problems for the operation teams. The operation teams is delivering the work, but the handover from sales was so poor that customer expectations don't match reality. And then your renewal or retention rate starts to drop, and everyone's pointing at everyone else. Marketing blames sales, sales blames marketing, the theme that we see all too often. Operations blame sales. Leadership looks at the data, and the data doesn't give a clear answer. That's because the data isn't connected. That is a structural problem, not a people problem, not a culture problem, a structural problem. And the reason it persists is because most organizations try to solve structural problems with tactical interventions. They run a sales training program, they redesign the website, they even implement a new CRM. They hire a head of marketing. All those things can be valuable, but if the underlying structure is broken, none of them will move the needle in the way that you need them to. You cannot train your way out of structural misalignment. So here's the frame I want to offer. Stop thinking about your commercial function as a collection of departments and start thinking about it as a system. A commercial system that has a specific definition, at least in the way that I use the term. It means every touch point, process, platform, and team involved in generating, converting, and retaining revenue operating as a single, connected, coordinated entity. Not a marketing department or a sales department and an operations department that occasionally speaks to each other. A system with shared data, shared language, shared accountability, and a designed flow from first contact to long-term customer value. Now, I know how that sounds. It sounds big. It sounds expensive. It sounds like something that only large enterprises get to think about. But that is exactly the misconception I want to challenge. Because the businesses I work with that have built connected commercial systems, many of them are not large. They're 20, 30, 50 people. They don't have enterprise budgets. What they have is clarity about how their commercial engine is supposed to work and the discipline to build towards that. And the difference in performance between a business with a connected commercial system and one without, that isn't marginal. It's the difference between consistent, predictable revenue and the revenue roller coaster, where you have a fantastic quarter and then a quiet quarter. Then you hire to fix the quiet quarter. Then you have a good quarter again, and the costs go up, and you're back to where you started. Most founders know that roller coaster very well. What they don't always know is that it's not inevitable. Let me make this concrete. I want to walk you through a scenario I've seen play out in various forms, dozens of times. I'm going to keep it anonymized, but the pattern is real. A professional services business. They're growing, 13, 14 million in revenue. Strong reputation, good team. The founder has built this thing from nothing, and it shows. There's a real craft in what they deliver, but growth has stalled. They've been between 12 and 15 million for about 2 years, and they can't figure out why. So they do what most businesses do. They call in a marketing agency. The agency runs some campaigns, leads come in, and the pipeline looks busier, but the win rates don't improve. Revenue doesn't move, and after 12 months, the founder is 20,000 pound lighter. The agency relationship has ended, and nothing has fundamentally changed. Now, was the marketing bad? Not necessarily, but marketing into a broken system doesn't fix the system, it just accelerates the exposure of what's actually broken. When we look at this business properly, at the full commercial system, it's not just the top of funnel. Here's what we found. The website was generating inquiries, which is good, but the inquiry form was generic, and the data form wasn't flowing into the CRM properly. Obviously, not good. So the sales team was manually entering leads when they got around to it. The average response time to an inquiry, 3 days. For context, research suggests that response within 5 minutes increases conversion likelihood by up to 9 times. They responded in 3 days. But the proposals they were sending were inconsistent. There was no standard format, pricing logic, and the sales conversations that were happening without any clear qualification framework. So the team was spending equal time on deals worth 20,000 and deals worth 200,000. And here's the one that really hurt. Their existing customer base, clients who had been with them for 3, 4, and 5 years, were being almost entirely neglected from commercial standpoints. There was no structured retention process, no account development program, no structured conversation about expanded services. Revenue that was just sitting there in existing relationships wasn't being captured because the system wasn't designed to capture it. We didn't rebuild everything overnight, but over time, with restructuring of the commercial system, the inquiry process, the CRM architecture, the proposal framework, the qualification approach, and basic account development programs, revenue moved from 13 million to 19 million. Not from more marketing or a better system. That's what commercial transformation actually looks like. It's not glamorous. It's not a rebrand. It's structural work. And the results are structural. I want to give you something practical to take from this episode, because I'm not interested in leaving you with a problem diagnosis and no direction. What I'm going to share with you is what I call commercial connectivity audit. 5 questions, 5 areas of your commercial system to interrogate. Not to solve right now, but to see clearly. Point 1. Can you trace a clean, unbroken line from the first contact to recurring revenue? Does data move between your systems without manual intervention? If someone clicks on an ad today, can you tell 3 months from now whether they'll become a customer and what they're worth? If the answer is no, you have a flow problem. And you cannot make good commercial decisions without clean flow. Point 2. Are your marketing team and sales teams working from the same definition of a qualified lead? Are they measured on metrics that create alignment or metrics that create friction? Now, I've seen organizations where marketing is measured on lead volume and sales is measured on deal value. Those 2 metrics are not naturally aligned. And the result is permanent, low-level conflict between 2 teams that should be on one system. Point 3. Look at every transition point in your commercial system. Website inquiry, inquiry to discovery call, discovery to proposal, proposal to close, onboarding to delivery, and even delivery to renewal. At each stage of those transition points, is there a defined or designed process? Or is it largely improvised? Because improvised transitions are where revenue leaks. Every time a buyer hits a transition point and the experience feels unjoined, they lose confidence. And lost confidence loses deals. Point 4. Where does your commercial data actually live? Is it in one place or across 15 places? Can your leadership team answer these 4 questions in under 30 seconds? How many qualified opportunities are in the pipeline? What is the average deal velocity? What is the current win rate? And what is the monthly recurring revenue by segment? If those questions require a meeting to answer, your data architecture is broken. And point 5, what is your structured program for retaining and expanding existing customer revenue? Not informal relationship management, a structured program with defined touch points, commercial conversations, and expansion pathways. For most businesses, this is the single highest return of investment area of commercial investments. Because selling to an existing customer costs a fraction of acquiring a new one. But most commercial systems are almost entirely acquisition focused. Those 5 areas, flow, alignment, conversion architecture, data architecture, and retention infrastructure. If you can get those 5 things working together, you have a commercial system. If any one of the 5 points is broken or disconnected, you have a commercial constraint, and that constraint will cap your growth, whether you know it or not. So I want to talk to you about what happens if you don't address this. And it's not to alarm you, but because I think this is where most conversations about commercial transformation fall short. They diagnose the problem without being honest about the cost of leaving it in place. The first consequence is opportunity cost. Every month you operate with a disconnected commercial system, you are generating less revenue than your market position, your team quality, and your product deserve. That delta between the revenue you are generating and the revenue you could be generating is invisible. It doesn't show up as a loss on your P&L, but it is real. The second consequence is compounding complexity. Structural problems in commercial systems, they don't stay still. They get more complicated over time. New tools get added on top of broken architecture, and new people get hired into broken processes. And with every addition, the eventual cost of restructuring goes up. The businesses that are hardest to help are not the ones with no system. They're the ones with 15 years of layered, undocumented, deeply embedded commercial debt, because unpicking that requires care and time and organizational patience that most businesses can't find. The third consequence, and this is the one that I think matters most, is leadership capacity. When your commercial system is broken, it demands constant manual intervention. Someone has to bridge the gaps, and in most businesses, that someone is the founder, or the commercial director, or even the CEO, which means the most expensive, highest value person in the organization is spending significant time on work that should be handled by the system. That is not a sustainable use of leadership capacity, and it creates a ceiling, because you can only scale as fast as your leader can personally carry the weight of the things the system is doing. The commercial system that got you to 10 million will not get you to 50. Not because you're not good enough, but because it was never designed to. I want to close with something that might be slightly uncomfortable to hear, so I'll apologize early, because it's the thing that most advisors don't say clearly. You cannot audit your own commercial system objectively. Not because you're not intelligent enough, but because you're too close to it. You built it. You made the decisions that created it. You're operating inside it every day, which means your mental model of how the system works is not the same as how the system actually works. I've sat in rooms with incredibly sharp founders and asked them to walk me through their commercial flow end to end. And almost always, there are assumptions in that walkthrough that turn out to be wrong. Not because the founder was being dishonest, but because the gap between the designed process and the lived process is almost always wider than people expect. Now, this is not a criticism. It's a structural reality of operating inside any complex system. What it does mean is that commercial transformation, real transformation, structural transformation, requires an outside perspective, someone who is not emotionally invested in the decisions that created the current system, someone who can look at the full commercial architecture from first click to recurring revenue and tell you honestly what's connected, what's broken, and what's costing you. That's the work that we do at B10. Every commercial system has its own architecture, its own constraints, its own history. The work is always specific, but the outcome is consistent. A commercial engine that operates as a system, that generates predictable revenue, that scales with the business rather than constraining it, that's what's possible. And it tends to be closer than most founders think. If anything in this episode has landed for you, if you recognize any of the patterns we've described in your own business, and I want you to be honest, I would encourage you to sit with the 5 questions from the commercial connectivity audit. Write down your honest answers. Lying to yourself only makes things worse. And I don't want any aspirational answers, just the honest ones. And if what you find raises questions you'd like to think through with someone who looks at commercial systems for a living, then reach out to us at B10. Not for a sales conversation, but for a proper commercial conversation. Details are in the show notes, and if this episode has been useful, share it with someone who runs a business or leads a commercial team. The conversation we need to be having about how commercial systems actually work is too important to stay inside individual organizations. Next episode, we will go into the mechanics of commercial architecture, specifically how to design a revenue system that scales. We'll get practical, we'll get specific. But until then, keep building.
You've been listening to Commercial Transformation, produced by B10. If this episode was useful, follow the podcast for future conversations on building better commercial systems.